Jake Reiner had convinced himself that this Christmas would finally bring everyone back together. After months of distance and silence,
collapsing into
he
a
pictured
suffocating
quiet
guilt
return
that
to
left
the
Jake
Brentwood house.
interrogating
No
himself
cameras,
without mercy.
no arguments, just one ordinary night at the same table with his parents, as if time could be reset. That fragile hope collapsed on December 14th when a phone call cut through everything. Rob Reiner and Michelle Singer Reiner were dead, brutally stabbed. Their lives ended in a violence so sudden it felt unreal. Then came the name that froze Jake in place: Nick Reiner, his younger brother, the boy he had protected for years, the one person he never imagined would be tied to something this horrific. Days later, Jake appeared on KCBS, and what he said stunned listeners. "I warned my parents," he admitted. "I was afraid he would one day do something that couldn't be taken back." It wasn't said in anger. It was the sound of a truth finally breaking through years of silence. Jake spoke about tensions the family had buried, about how love mixed with denial can slowly warp into something dangerous. He described favoritism, leniency, and a pattern of shielding Nick from consequences. Choices that felt compassionate at the time, but grew heavier with every passing year. So when Nick called from the darkness, pleading for help, insisting on his innocence and asking Jake to secure his release, the answer was no. Not out of hatred, but clarity. Jake couldn't carry it anymore. Whatever this family once was, it had been breaking for a long time. This was the final fracture. On December 17th, Nick climbed the courthouse steps in Los Angeles, each footfall weighted with consequence. Across the city, Jake sat beneath the harsh lights of the KCBS studio. The familiar chair felt foreign now. His dark suit hung loosely, no longer the uniform of a composed journalist, but something worn thin by years of restraint. His hands clenched against the desk until the color drained from his knuckles. "I've sat in this chair through countless long nights," he said quietly, "but never one like this." Jake Reiner was born on May 6, 1991, into a family where creativity and humor filled the air. As the eldest son of Rob Reiner and Michelle Singer, and the grandson of Carl Reiner, his childhood looked idyllic from the outside, but inside the home, Jake learned early what it meant to yield. Nick was smaller, more fragile, so Jake stepped back, first with toys, then with space, then with his own needs. "He's still little," the adults would say. Jake learned to nod, to fade, to be okay so no one else had to worry. Silence became his survival. What began as love slowly turned into disappearance. They protected him, justified his behavior, and told themselves that patience would smooth every rough edge. Jake remembers his father deflecting Nick's outbursts with humor, his mother pulling Nick close and whispering reassurance. "He's just struggling right now." Jake stood nearby, understanding the fear behind that love, yet sensing an invisible line quietly drawn between himself and the rest of the family. He never accused his parents of cruelty. Jake knew their devotion to Nick came from fear, not indifference. But as he grew older, he began to see the cost of that devotion and who was paying it. He became the stable one, the reasonable one, the child who absorbed what went unsaid. Restraint became expectation. Compromise became habit. Being easy became his role. "I'm used to it," he once told his mother, half smiling, half confessing. Michelle smiled back, never realizing those words carried a quiet request to be seen. As a teenager, Jake found refuge in baseball. It was almost sacred in the Reiner family, passed down from Carl to Rob and then to him. Rob took Jake to Dodger Stadium again and again, father and son sitting shoulder to shoulder beneath the California sun. Those moments felt uncomplicated, honest. Jake rarely spoke about them, but he held on to them fiercely. "My father gave his love of baseball to me, and I gave it to Jake," Rob once said, recalling trips to the Baseball Hall of Fame in Cooperstown. Those memories moved him to tears, moments where being a father felt pure and complete. But while baseball anchored Jake's bond with his father, another force was quietly reshaping his adolescence. By the time Nick was 15, darker patterns had begun to surface. The first shadows of addiction crept in, subtle enough to ignore, easy to minimize. Nick's gaze lingered too long. His temper flared and vanished. He disappeared for nights at a time. Jake watched from a distance, believing at first that his brother was reaching out in the only way he knew how. But year after year, the pattern repeated. School, treatment, relapse. Each return carried fresh hope. Each promise sounded convincing. "This time it's different," Nick would say, hands trembling at the dinner table. Rob listened with unwavering faith. Michelle reached across, gripping her son's hand as if holding on could keep him alive. Jake wanted to believe, but memory whispered otherwise. What hurt most wasn't just watching Nick unravel. It was watching his parents unravel with him. Rob aged quietly, his posture sagging, his silences stretching longer. Michelle lived in constant vigilance, waiting for the phone to ring. Once, Jake overheard her whisper in the kitchen, voice shaking, "As long as he's breathing, I won't give up." That was when Jake realized their home was no longer a family. It was a place of endurance, measured hour by hour. And a question he never voiced began to harden inside him. Who saves the ones doing the saving? He would often stand in the shadows backstage, watching others step forward into the light, and quietly wonder if he was meant to do the same. Sometimes the thought slipped out, barely louder than breath. What if this was never my path? The question followed him into adulthood, lingering like a shadow he could never quite outrun. So even with the Reiner name resting heavily on his shoulders, Jake made a deliberate choice to stay out of the spotlight. Instead of chasing visibility, he chose something quieter. He enrolled at Syracuse University and committed himself to broadcast journalism. Away from Hollywood expectations, his fascination with storytelling finally ignited. "I only have one other passion," he once admitted, "and that's news." It was a simple sentence, but it marked a clean break from legacy and assumption. After graduation, Jake began where few were watching, first at Kion in Salinas, then at KPRC Channel 2 in Houston between 2016 and 2018. His career advanced slowly and deliberately, small markets to larger ones, feature stories to sports, never rushed, never flashy. Colleagues valued his composure, especially during tense law enforcement coverage. On camera, he projected calm authority, focused eyes, measured delivery, a presence that invited trust. But when the lights went off and the microphone came away, he returned to the private stillness he'd carried for years. In Houston and later at KCBS in Los Angeles, his life revolved around the relentless pace of journalism, sirens, breaking news, late nights, and interviews with people caught at their most fragile moments. He told their stories with empathy and restraint while carefully keeping his own at arm's length. Jake never denied his family's fame, but he refused to rely on it. His reputation, he insisted, would be earned through work alone. Baseball remained his one unbroken thread to home. Through the podcast Incline Dodgers, he and close friends blended humor with sharp analysis, a quiet joy connecting him back to a legacy passed down through generations. "I chose journalism," he once said softly, "because I believed that if I stayed behind the story, life wouldn't come for me." A faint smile followed, brief, distant. "I was wrong." Then came an unexpected turn. Jake returned to acting, cautiously and without fanfare. Roles came slowly, television to film, comedy to heavier drama. There was no sudden breakout. Instead, something distinct emerged, a performer shaped by observation and restraint, carrying emotional weight that lingered long after scenes ended. By 2023, appearances in Curb Your Enthusiasm, For All Mankind, and American Crime Story quietly built toward recognition. In 2024, his performance in the independent film Love and Tax earned him Best Actor at the Myrtle Beach International Film Festival. Recognition that felt earned, not inherited. Still, in his most unguarded moments, Jake admitted a truth he rarely said aloud. Every time he stepped in front of the camera, he wasn't just acting for an audience. In his mind, Rob stood just off to the side, arms folded, proud but restrained. Michelle lingered nearby, watching softly, as if through an unseen lens. Every achievement, every quiet victory, he wanted to share with them first. He sent photos from set, links to articles, short videos between scenes. Michelle always replied with warmth and encouragement. Rob's messages were brief but heavy with meaning. When his father once wrote, "You are on the right path," Jake reread it endlessly, letting it steady him whenever doubt crept in. That Christmas, one thing felt certain. He was going home. After years of distance and unfinished conversations, he imagined sitting again in the Brentwood living room, finally placing his hard-won accomplishments in front of his parents. He pictured Rob's quiet nod of approval, Michelle's smile, her hand squeezing his. For the first time, he believed he would return not as a boy still finding himself, but as a man they could be proud of. Then it vanished. On December 14th, while Jake was in New York finishing work on a film, the call came without warning. His parents were dead. Rob Reiner and Michelle Singer Reiner had been brutally murdered inside their home. Before his mind could absorb that reality, a second truth followed. Nick, his younger brother, was the suspect. Jake didn't cry. He didn't collapse. He stood frozen, as if gravity had let go. Christmas stopped being a reunion and became an absence. Two empty chairs that would never be filled. He flew back to Los Angeles and found his sister Romy. They held each other, clinging to whatever fragments of family remained. Later, grief sharpened into anger, and Jake spoke words that stunned listeners. "I warned them," he said. Months earlier, when Nick wanted to move back into the house after years of addiction and instability, Jake begged his parents to stop it. "He's not safe. I'm afraid he'll do something that can't be undone." He pleaded for boundaries, for distance, for protection. But fear lost to hope. Rob believed love would save his son. Michelle believed shelter would heal him. Jake could still hear his father's calm voice. "We're family. We don't turn away." This time, love outweighed caution, and the cost was everything. The years Nick lost to the streets. The damage addiction carved into his behavior. Compassion had always prevailed, and now the cost of that compassion was irreversible. I never imagined he could do something like this," Jake said, his voice collapsing under the weight of it. Grief ignited into something raw and scorching, aimed at the brother he had once protected without hesitation. "Nick killed our parents. Nick destroyed everything." The words shook as they left him. I warned them, and nobody listened." Tears fell freely, not just from loss, but from betrayal, because the wound came from his own blood. Anger didn't last. It turned inward, collapsing into suffocating guilt. Jake began interrogating himself without mercy. Could I have stopped this? Should I have come home sooner, pushed harder, refused to let it go? His voice dropped to a whisper. If I had gone back earlier? The sentence trailed off, unanswered, swallowed by self-blame. When he spoke about Nick after that, the emotions became impossible to separate. Rage, grief, pity, horror, layered together. "He's my brother," Jake said, his voice breaking under the contradiction, "but he's also the person who took my parents from me." His body folded inward where language failed, shoulders shaking, hands trembling, tears falling like a dam that had finally burst. Shortly after Nick was taken into custody, Jake's phone vibrated once. One name. He didn't need to look. When he finally answered, Nick's voice poured out in a frantic rush, pleading, panicked, insisting he was innocent, that everything had spiraled out of control. "You're all I have left," Nick begged. Then came the number, $4 million for bail. Nick asked Jake to help, to use whatever money, connections, or influence he had left. "I can't survive in here," he said, breaking down. Jake closed his eyes, images of Rob and Michelle flooding his mind. Parents who could no longer be protected. He listened to his own breathing, loud and uneven, standing between two collapsing cliffs. "Nick," Jake finally said, his voice hollow, stripped of warmth. I can't. The words landed with crushing finality. I can't use money to escape the truth. On the other end of the line, desperation curdled into rage. Accusations followed. Betrayal, abandonment. Jake wept openly. I'm not abandoning you, he said, but I can't save you like this. The call ended in silence. Jake stared at the dark screen, knowing one devastating truth. Sometimes love is not enough, and learning that may be the cruelest punishment of all. When his report aired on December 17th, viewers didn't react with outrage or spectacle. They reacted with stillness. Many admitted they cried. Others turned the TV off, only to turn it back on moments later, unable to endure it, yet unable to look away. Jake hadn't just told a story that night. He revealed a pain no one should ever have to carry in public, and in doing so, reminded the world how fragile the idea of home truly is.